My father announced I was confined to my room in front of our entire extended family. Then his own lawyer walked through the door with the real story. I'm Eliza Vance, and I'm 28 years old. It was the day after Thanksgiving when my father stood up during dessert, pointed a finger at me across a table of 25 relatives, and ordered me to my childhood bedroom like I was a defiant teenager. My only crime? Asking a simple question about what my grandmother had planned for her estate. The room erupted in laughter. I could feel the heat rising up my neck, a familiar burn from years of similar scenes, but I held his gaze and gave him only 2 words. Fine. Okay. The following morning, he came to my door with a sneer already etched onto his face. Finally understand where you belong? He asked, his voice dripping with satisfaction. Then, he pushed the door open and saw the empty closet, the bare dresser, the stripped bed. Before he could process what had happened, the front doorbell rang. And there on the porch, clutching a worn leather briefcase with visibly shaking hands, stood our family's longtime attorney. Mr. Vance, he said, his voice trembling, do you have any idea what you've just done? I need to tell you the whole story, but before I do, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. And leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. The first domino fell on a rainy Tuesday morning in late September, the day my grandmother passed. The call came at 5:47 a.m. from my mother. I remember the exact time because I was already awake, sitting at my drafting table in my 450-square-foot apartment, working on a landscaping plan for a new client in the suburbs. It's Grandma, my mother said, her voice thin and fragile. She's gone, sweetheart. I drove the 25 minutes to the hospital in total silence. No radio, no music, just the rhythmic sound of the windshield wipers and my own uneven breathing. My father was already in the hallway when I arrived. Richard Vance, 61, a retired judge who still carried himself like he was wearing a robe. Even at that early hour, he wasn't grieving. He was on his cell phone discussing legal procedures, probate schedules, filing deadlines. He ended the call the moment he noticed me, without a word of acknowledgement. Beside him stood my brother Marcus. He was 32, immaculate in a tailored suit, his arm draped around our father's shoulder like they were political allies at a victory rally. They were a solid wall, impenetrable. I stood alone at the other end of the corridor, clutching a styrofoam cup of coffee I never drank. The last conversation I'd had with my grandmother was in the garden behind her house on Elm Street. She was in her wheelchair, gripping my hand with startling strength. Eliza, she'd whispered, glancing around to make sure no one else could hear. I've made arrangements. I've taken care of everything. Do you trust me? I nodded, not fully understanding. Not yet. 3 days later, the funeral was held at an old stone church downtown. My father gave the eulogy. 15 minutes of rhetoric about family legacy, the Vance name, tradition. He mentioned Marcus by name 6 times. He mentioned my mother once. He never mentioned me. Afterward, during the reception, one of my aunts asked what I was doing with my life these days. Before I could answer, my father interjected from behind me, "She draws plants for a living." A handful of people chuckled. The old familiar burn started in my chest, rising like a slow tide. I was about to excuse myself when a man I didn't recognize stepped forward. He had silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses with delicate gold frames. He took my hand gently and said, "Your grandmother spoke very highly of you. I'll be in touch." Then, he vanished into the crowd before I could ask his name. I didn't realize it at the time, But that man was Arthur Pendleton, the attorney who held the keys to everything. That evening, about 20 of us gathered at the Vance house for dinner. The same white colonial on Elm Street, with its wrought iron gate and century-old oak trees. My grandmother had bought that house with her own inheritance long before she married my grandfather. I'd always adored it, the crown molding, the deep window sills, the sprawling garden where she grew peonies in shades of pink and white. Inside, the long mahogany dining table was set with the family silver, the same set that had been handed down for generations. Candles flickered in silver holders. A bottle of Oregon Pinot Noir breathed on the sideboard. Everything arranged to project an image of established wealth and unbroken lineage. My father sat at the head of the table. Naturally, he raised his glass. "My mother's assets will be managed under my authority," he announced, scanning the room with his judicial gaze. "I'll ensure the estate is distributed appropriately based on merit and responsibility." His eyes landed on me. "That means you don't need to trouble yourself with any of this, Eliza. Complex matters aren't really your area of expertise." Marcus nodded in agreement. His wife adjusted her pearl necklace and said, "It's for the best." I set my fork down. "Dad, Grandma told me something different." My father cut me off immediately. "Your grandmother was confused near the end. Forget whatever she told you." My mother kept her eyes fixed on her plate, saying nothing. After dinner, I excused myself and went upstairs to the bedroom where I'd grown up. The poster I'd taped to the wall at 16 was still there, edges curling with age. I sat on the edge of the twin bed and opened the nightstand drawer out of habit. There was an envelope I'd never seen before. Cream-colored stationery with a faint watermark. My name written across the front in blue ink, a handwriting I recognized instantly. My grandmother's, shaky but deliberate. My hands were trembling as I opened it. Inside were two things. The first was a letter, 2 pages covered in her careful script. The pen had pressed so hard it left grooves in the paper, as if she'd wanted the words to be permanent, impossible to erase. The second was a partial photocopy of what looked like a legal document. The header read, "Irrevocable Trust Agreement. Eleanor M. Vance, grantor," and halfway down the first copied page, underlined in yellow highlighter, was a single line, "Beneficiary, Eliza Marie Vance." I read the letter with tears streaming down my face. "Eliza, if you're reading this, your father is already doing exactly what I knew he would. I'm so sorry I couldn't stop him while I was still here. The full trust is with my attorney, Arthur Pendleton. His office is in downtown Portland. I've left you only a partial copy, not enough to prove anything on its own, but enough so you'll know the truth. Don't show this to anyone. Not your father, not Marcus, not even your mother. I love Linda, but she will tell Richard. Wait for the right moment, and Arthur will handle the rest. You've always been the builder, Eliza, the one who creates. Don't let them tear you down. All my love, Grandma." I folded the letter and pressed it against my chest. The photocopy was incomplete. I couldn't use it as evidence. I didn't have a lawyer. I didn't even know where to find Arthur Pendleton, but for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of something I'd almost forgotten. Hope. I left the Vance house the next morning without saying goodbye to anyone. My studio apartment welcomed me back with its familiar chaos, potted plants crowding every windowsill, my drafting table buried under layers of tracing paper. A cold mug of tea from days ago still sitting in the sink. I loved this place. It was small, barely more than a closet, but it was mine. I opened my laptop and searched for Arthur Pendleton, attorney at law. The results appeared quickly. A small practice on the west side of town, specializing in estate law. A photo showed a silver-haired man with wire-rimmed glasses. The same man from the funeral. I stared at the phone number. I didn't call. Not yet. Because a voice inside my head, the voice my father had cultivated over decades, whispered, "What if Grandma really was confused? What if this is all a fantasy? What if you call and find out the one person who believed in you didn't actually know what she was signing?" I wasn't ready to risk that. Not yet. Instead, I threw myself into work. A landscape architecture firm had given me a tight deadline for a rooftop garden project. I needed the paycheck. I was still carrying $32,000 in student loans from the 1 year of law school I'd attended before switching to design. The year my father said I'd betrayed the family. While reviewing project emails, I spotted something unexpected. A message from Marcus, mistakenly forwarded to me. The subject line read, "Petition for Trust Amendment." My stomach dropped. I opened it and scanned the contents quickly. Then my phone buzzed with a deadline reminder, and I had to close my laptop and get to the office. But I'd already seen enough to know that something was already in motion. 3 weeks passed. The rooftop project consumed my days, and I let it because work was easier than fear. But the email lingered in my mind like a splinter. Then, my mother called. "Your father wants the whole family together for Christmas," she said, her voice carrying that familiar apologetic tone. "He wants to make amends." I almost laughed. My father had never made amends in his life. He broke things, then blamed you for being breakable. "I'll think about it, Mom. Please, honey, he's trying." I told her I'd let her know and hung up. Then I sat at my kitchen table, a second-hand piece I'd sanded and refinished myself, and finally opened Marcus's forwarded email chain. It was a series of messages spanning 2 weeks. The subject line was exactly what it seemed. Marcus had drafted a legal petition to modify the beneficiary designation on Grandma's trust. The stated grounds were my alleged financial incompetence and pattern of unstable employment. My brother had written that about me in formal legal language, but the line that made my vision blur wasn't the legal jargon. It was the casual message Marcus had typed to our father at the bottom of the chain. "She won't fight it. She never does. That's what makes this perfect." I sat there for a long time. Then I took screenshots of every message, uploaded them to my cloud storage, and backed them up on a USB drive I kept hidden in my sock drawer. I called my mother back. "Tell Dad I'll come for Christmas." I was going back, but not to make amends. The next morning, I called Arthur Pendleton's office. A receptionist answered with a warm, efficient voice. I gave my name. There was a brief pause. Then she said, "Miss Vance, Mr. Pendleton has been expecting your call. Can you come in this afternoon?" 2 hours later, I was seated across from him in a cozy office lined with bookshelves. Arthur Pendleton was exactly as I remembered. Silver-haired, gold-rimmed glasses, the calm demeanor of a man who chose his words with surgical precision. "Your grandmother hired me nearly 2 decades ago," he said. "I drafted her original will, her living trust, and about 8 years ago she came to me with a deep concern. She asked me to create an irrevocable trust with you as the sole beneficiary." He slid a document across his desk. The original trust agreement, thick cream-colored paper, a notary seal from the state of Oregon. The trust holds $580,000, managed by a major bank. Irrevocable means your father cannot alter the beneficiary. Any attempt to do so requires your written consent or a court order based on clear evidence of the grantor's mental incapacity at the time of signing. He paused. Your grandmother anticipated this. She had her physician perform a cognitive evaluation the same week she signed. The results are in the file. She was fully competent. I exhaled, a breath I felt like I'd been holding for years. Pendleton continued. Your father filed a petition 3 weeks ago seeking to change the beneficiary designation to your brother. He told the court he was unable to locate you to obtain consent. The old lawyer's jaw tightened. You and I both know that's not true. I showed him the email chain. He read it without changing expression, then looked up. This is clear evidence of breach of fiduciary duty. If you want to fight this, you have everything you need. I nodded. I want to fight it. He nodded back. Then we'll proceed. He added, almost as an afterthought, there's one more thing, Eliza. Your grandmother also left you the small cabin at the coast. It's part of the trust. I don't believe your father knows about it. He never read the full document. I stared at him. The coastal cabin. The little cedar house where Grandma took me every summer, where we sat on the porch and watched the sunset paint the ocean gold. She'd told me once it was her favorite place in the world. She left it to me. Arthur Pendleton looked at me over his glasses. Your grandmother knew exactly what would happen after she was gone. And she spent years making sure you'd be protected. The question is, when do you want to use this? Christmas, I said. He's invited the whole family. About 25 people. He studied me for a moment, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. The Wednesday before Christmas, I packed a single bag, one change of clothes, my best wool coat, a toothbrush, and a thick manila folder of notarized copies. The originals stayed with Pendleton. Copies were all I needed. The originals were for the courtroom. The copies were for the family. I drove south through the gray winter hills of Oregon, the bare trees skeletal against the sky. The Vance house appeared through the trees like it always had. White colonial, wrought iron gate, the ancient oak guarding the front lawn. From the outside, it looked like a postcard. My mother met me at the door with a hug that lasted a beat too long. Your father's in his study, she murmured. He's in a mood. I carried my bag upstairs to my old bedroom. The poster was still there. The nightstand drawer was empty now, the envelope long gone. From downstairs, I heard Marcus's voice, then his wife's bright laughter, the clink of wine glasses. I knelt and slid the manila folder under the mattress. Then I went to the window. The garden below was overgrown and gray, untended since Grandma had gotten too sick to kneel. The sight of it tightened my throat. I pressed my palm flat against the cold glass and whispered to no one. I'm here, Grandma. Downstairs, the wine was flowing and the fire was crackling. My father was in his leather armchair, a glass of port in his hand. He didn't stand when I entered. Oh, you actually came, he said. Marcus was on the sofa beside his wife, swirling wine. He glanced at my coat and commented, still driving that old car, Eliza? I smiled, sat down, said nothing. Tomorrow, 25 relatives would fill this house. My father had organized the largest Christmas gathering in Vance family history. I didn't know why yet, but I suspected Richard Vance never did anything without an audience. Christmas morning, the house filled like a theater before a performance. Cars lined the street by 10 in the morning. Aunts, uncles, cousins. By noon, there were 27 people in the Vance house. Laughter, conversations, children running through the hallways. I helped in the kitchen because no one asked me to do anything else. At 4 in the afternoon, we sat down to eat. I was placed at a folding table between my 8-year-old cousin and an empty chair. My father stood at the head of the main table, crystal chandelier above him. He raised his glass. "This Christmas is bittersweet," he said, his courtroom voice filling the room. "We lost Mom this year, but the Vance family endures. And I'm especially proud of my son, Marcus, who just won the biggest case of his career." Applause. Marcus accepted it with practiced humility. From the folding table, my aunt called out, "What about Eliza?" "Any good news, dear?" My father answered for me. "Eliza is still figuring things out. She's got a creative streak, we'll give her that." Laughter rippled across both tables. I sat there absorbing it, the way I always had, spine straight, face neutral. After dinner, my father stood again. "I'll be making an important announcement tomorrow morning about Mom's estate. I expect everyone to be present." He smiled, the smile of a man who'd already decided the outcome. It's what she would have wanted. I looked at Marcus. He was studying his wine glass with a small private smile. I looked at my mother. She was staring at the tablecloth. I excused myself to do the dishes. The kitchen was quiet except for running water. I was scrubbing a roasting pan when Marcus appeared in the doorway. "You know," he said casually, "you should be grateful Dad even lets you sit at the table." He chuckled at his own joke. I didn't turn around. But something inside me finally snapped taut. "Marcus," I said, my voice steady, "do you know what Grandma left me?" The silence behind me changed. I heard his wine glass clink against the counter. He left without a word. 10 minutes later, my father's voice boomed from the living room. "Eliza, get in here now." I dried my hands and walked in. 25 faces stared at me. My father stood in the center of the room, port wine in one hand, the other pointing at me like a prosecutor. "What did you say to your brother?" His voice was the judicial baritone designed to make people smaller. "You think you can manipulate this family?" I opened my mouth to respond. He didn't let me. "You're grounded," he declared. "Grounded until you apologize to your brother. Go to your room." The room erupted in laughter, 25 people laughing because Richard Vance had just grounded his 28-year-old daughter like a misbehaving child. My face burned. I looked for my mother. She was staring at her hands, silent. No one said stop. I looked at my father, held his gaze for 3 seconds, and said in a voice so calm it surprised me, "Fine, okay." I turned and walked upstairs. I closed the bedroom door. And then I picked up my phone and called Arthur Pendleton. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Pendleton, I need you to bring the originals tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. A pause, then his steady voice, "I'll be there." I hung up, set my alarm for 4 in the morning, and sat on the edge of the twin bed in the dark, listening to the laughter still floating up through the floorboards. I left at 4:15 in the morning. No drama, no slamming doors. I packed my bag in the dark, slid the manila folder into my tote, and walked downstairs in my socks. The only thing I left behind was the framed photo of Grandma Eleanor on the nightstand, turned face down. I drove to a 24-hour diner 3 miles away, ordered coffee I didn't drink, and waited. At 7:42 in the morning, my phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Where are you? Dad's looking for you." I didn't respond. Inside the Vance house, the morning unfolded like this, according to my cousin Danny. My father came downstairs at 7:30, freshly showered, pressed shirt, looking like a man about to run a board meeting. He poured coffee and said, "Someone wake Eliza. She's got an apology to make." Nobody moved. He climbed the stairs himself, knocked twice. "Eliza, morning. Ready to apologize?" Silence. He opened the door. The bed was made. The closet was empty. The drawers were bare. The room held nothing of me except the photograph face down on the nightstand. Danny said my father stood in that doorway for a full 10 seconds before his expression shifted. Confusion first, then something darker. He came downstairs slowly. "Eliza's gone," he announced to the 20-odd relatives lingering over breakfast. His voice was flat. "She left like a coward." Marcus looked up from his laptop and smiled. "Well," he said, "that settles it." Then the doorbell rang. My mother opened it, and there on the front porch, in a gray suit with a brown leather briefcase, stood Arthur Pendleton. "I'm Arthur Pendleton," he said, "attorney for Eleanor Vance. I need to speak with the entire family immediately." The dining room went quiet in stages. Pendleton walked in the way a man enters a courtroom, unhurried, deliberate, completely certain of his authority. He set his briefcase on the dining table and opened it. My father rose. "Pendleton," he said, the name like a warning. "You weren't invited. This is my home." Pendleton looked at him. "This is the home Eleanor Vance built with her own family's money. Mr. Vance, I'm here because I have a legal obligation to the beneficiary of her trust. Eliza has no rights to. Eliza is the sole named beneficiary of an irrevocable trust executed 8 years ago. You've known this since the day your mother signed it." The room was dead silent. Richard's jaw clenched. My mother was in cognitive decline. Whatever she signed was signed in the presence of 2 independent witnesses and accompanied by a physician's evaluation confirming full mental competency. "I have the documentation here." He opened the briefcase and removed a folder. "Would you like me to read it aloud to everyone?" The question hung in the air. Richard looked at the folder like it was a weapon pointed at his chest. Then he said quietly, "Get out of my house." Pendleton replied, "What have you done, Mr. Vance?" My father stepped toward him. "I said get out. I'll call the police." "You're welcome to," Pendleton replied, not moving. "And when they arrive, I'll show them the petition you filed claiming you couldn't locate the beneficiary. The beneficiary who was sleeping in this house last night." Richard's face drained of color. Around the room, reactions spread. Hands over mouths, furrowed brows, exchanged glances. Marcus stood up, hands raised. "Mr. Pendleton, any documents you're referencing can be contested in the appropriate. You drafted the petition, didn't you, Mr. Vance?" Pendleton turned to face him. "I have the emails." Marcus's composure evaporated. "Dad," he said under his breath, "we need to talk privately." Richard didn't even look at him. My Aunt Margaret stood up. "Richard," she said firmly, "let the man speak." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. My father looked around and saw, perhaps for the first time, that the audience he'd assembled was no longer on his side. "This is absurd," he said, but his voice had lost its authority. When he realized the room was turning against him, he did what he always did. Escalated. "Everyone listen to me." He raised both hands. "This man was hired by my mother years ago. He's been filling Eliza's head with fantasies. This is a family matter." Pendleton's voice cut through. "I served your mother for 20 years. I am not an outsider. And I am here because you violated the terms of an irrevocable trust you swore to uphold as trustee. Out." My father's voice cracked. "Get out of this house, or I'll have you arrested." Pendleton looked at him for a long moment. Then he closed his briefcase with a deliberate click, tucked it under his arm, and nodded. "I'll leave. But I'll be back at 2 p.m. for the formal reading of Eleanor Vance's estate, which you scheduled yourself, Mr. Vance, and I won't be coming alone." The front door closed behind him. My father turned back to the room. 25 faces, some confused, some uncomfortable, a few openly skeptical. "I'm sorry you all had to see that," he said. "Eliza hired some cheap lawyer to stir up trouble. That's what she does. Runs from responsibility, then causes chaos from a distance." He shook his head. "This afternoon, I'll read Mom's will properly, and everything will be clear." Marcus sat back down, pulled his laptop onto his knees, and began deleting emails. The room exhaled. The crisis had been deferred. But 2 p.m. was only 5 hours away. I was parked outside a coffee shop, rain tracing crooked lines down my windshield. My laptop was open on the passenger seat. At 8:17 in the morning, I'd sent an email to the Trust Management Division requesting written confirmation of my status as beneficiary. At 9:41, the reply came, "Dear Miss Vance, you are the sole named beneficiary. The trust corpus of $580,000 remains intact." A petition to amend the beneficiary was filed on October 14th, but has not been approved by the court. No disbursements can be made without your written authorization. I saved it, backed it up, and printed a copy. At 11:15, Pendleton called. He threw me out, he said with dry amusement. Threatened to call the police. "I know. My cousin Danny texted me. 2 p.m. Eliza. I'll be parked on the next block. You go in first. I follow." A pause. "Are you sure?" "Once it's done, there's no going back." I looked out at the rain. "I've been going back my whole life. I'm done. Then I'll see you at 2. Inside the Vance house, the morning stretched tight. Danny told me later what it looked like. After Pendleton left, the casual holiday ease had curdled. People were still talking, still pouring coffee, but tension had taken hold. My mother, cornered in the hallway by my aunt, said, "I don't know, Margaret. Richard doesn't tell me about the finances. He never has." In the study, my father was making frantic phone calls, growing louder with each attempt. It was the day after Christmas. Every attorney's office in Portland was closed. Richard Vance, former judge, couldn't reach a single lawyer. Marcus appeared in the doorway. "Dad," he said carefully, "maybe we should postpone the reading." "No," came the granite reply. "I don't retreat. Not from Pendleton. Not from Eliza. Not from anyone." At 1:45 in the afternoon, I drove down Elm Street. The rain had stopped, and a thin winter sun was pushing through the clouds. I drove slowly. This was the street where Grandma taught me to ride a bike. The sidewalk where she walked me to school the year my parents couldn't be bothered. My phone buzzed. "Mom," I answered. "Eliza, where are you?" Her voice was strained. "Your father is furious. Just come home and apologize." "I'm coming home, Mom, but not to apologize." A silence, then very small. "What are you going to do?" "The right thing." I hung up, parked behind Pendleton's silver sedan, and got out. I slipped in through the kitchen entrance and stood in the hallway, just out of sight. Through the archway, I could see the scene. The living room had been rearranged. Chairs pulled from every room, all facing the fireplace. 25 people seated, waiting. My father stood before them, in his pressed shirt, reading glasses perched on his nose. In his hand, a single sheet of paper. "Thank you for being here," he said. As you know, my mother's passing left certain matters to be settled. The family trust will be consolidated under my management. The educational fund of $580,000 will be transferred to Marcus for stewardship of the next generation. As for Eliza, she will receive a gesture of goodwill. $5,000. He paused for effect. Any questions? From the hallway, I took a breath, pulled the manila folder from my tote, and stepped into the room. Behind me, the front door opened quietly. Arthur Pendleton walked in. 25 faces turned toward me. My father's expression went through 3 phases in 2 seconds: surprise, annoyance, then the courtroom mask snapping back into place. "Well," he said, "the prodigal daughter returns. Here to apologize?" "No," I said, my voice level, calm. "I'm here to hear the real will." I walked past him, past his pointed finger, and set the manila folder on the table beside the fireplace. Pendleton stepped in behind me, briefcase in hand. "What is this?" Richard said, annoyance curdling into something uglier. "I told you this morning." I turned to face the room. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I said, "but what my father just read is not my grandmother's will. It's not her trust document. This is the original irrevocable trust executed 8 years ago. My grandmother named one beneficiary. Me. Silence. Not the polite silence of a family gathering, the absolute silence of people realizing they are witnessing something that cannot be undone. My father's face drained of color. Aunt Margaret said clearly, "Let her speak." Pendleton stepped forward, opened his briefcase, and held up the original trust document with its notary seal. "This is the irrevocable trust of Eleanor Margaret Vance," he said, his voice steady. "Executed on March 14th, 8 years ago. I was present. The grantor establishes this trust for the sole benefit of her granddaughter Eliza Marie Vance. Trust corpus, $580,000. Additionally, the real property located at 4714 Elm Street, Portland, Oregon, shall transfer to the beneficiary upon the grantor's death." A collective gasp swept through the room. "The house," someone whispered. "She left her, the house." Pendleton continued. As trustee, Richard Vance was given administrative authority only. He was expressly prohibited from altering the beneficiary designation or dispersing funds without the beneficiary's written consent. He filed a petition to change the beneficiary to Marcus, claiming he couldn't locate Eliza. "I have the emails here." He produced the printed email chain, yellow highlighting visible across the room. He read aloud, "She won't fight it. She never fights anything. That's the beauty of it." The room turned to look at Marcus. He sat very still, his face ash-colored. His wife slowly extracted her hand from his arm. My father opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "She was confused," he said, the words threadbare. "My mother didn't know what she was signing." Pendleton's response was surgical. "Your mother's physician conducted a cognitive evaluation the same week as the signing. The results are documented here." Eleanor Vance scored in the 93rd percentile for her age group. A long beat of silence. Then from the back, Great-Aunt Judith, Eleanor's younger sister, spoke quietly. "Eleanor told me about the trust years ago. She said Richard would try to take it, but she'd made sure he couldn't. She knew." My father looked at Judith, then at Margaret, then at the room full of faces, no longer looking at him with respect. They were looking at him the way you look at something you've just discovered is rotten underneath. He turned on Marcus. "Say something." His voice broke open. "You're the lawyer. Contest it. Do something. Marcus didn't move. Dad. Irrevocable means irrevocable. I told you that from the beginning. You said she'd never find out. My father's hand came down on the back of a dining chair with a crack that made people flinch. In front of 25 witnesses, he'd just confirmed everything. Then, something shifted. My father's posture changed. The aggression drained away. He turned to me with glistening eyes. "Eliza, sweetheart," he said, his voice softening. "I was only trying to protect the family's assets. You're young. You don't have experience with this kind of money. I did this because I love you." I looked at him. The man who had dismissed my career, seated me at the children's table, grounded me at 28. I let the silence hold. Then I said, "You didn't do this because you love me, Dad. You did it because you've never believed a daughter deserves the same as a son. And that's not love. That's control." My mother stood up. Her face was wet, her hands trembling. She looked at my father and said, in a voice that shook but didn't break, "You owe her an apology, Richard. You've owed her one your entire life." The room held its breath. My father looked at her as if she'd spoken a language he didn't recognize. Then he turned and walked into his study and closed the door. In the minutes that followed, the room rearranged itself. My Aunt Margaret hugged me. "Your grandmother would be so proud of you." Danny squeezed my shoulder. "I always knew you were the toughest one in the family." Cousins came forward with quiet apologies. Not all of them. Some stayed seated, uncomfortable. A few left. Marcus rose from the sofa. He didn't look at me. He walked toward the door, his wife following. She paused in the hallway, reached up and unclasped her pearl necklace, dropping it into her pocket, as though she wanted to be less associated with everything that had just happened. Monday morning, Arthur Pendleton filed 3 documents. The first was a petition to remove Richard Vance as trustee for breach of fiduciary duty. The second was a request to appoint Pendleton as interim trustee. The third was a complaint to the state bar against Marcus Vance for ethical violations. Within 2 weeks, the court granted the removal. Richard didn't contest. His own attorney advised him bluntly he had no legal footing. The $580,000 trust was transferred to an account in my name. The deed to 4714 Elm Street was updated. My name replaced Eleanor's, the colonial house, the wrought iron gate, the dining table, the garden, all mine. Marcus received a formal investigation notice from the bar. He faced a 6-month suspension and lost his largest client. He quietly moved into corporate consulting. My father called me once, 3 days after the filing. "You've destroyed this family," he said. I said, "No, Dad, you did. I just brought the receipts." He hung up. 2 weeks later, I drove to Elm Street with a single key. I parked, walked through the gate, climbed the porch steps, and turned the key. The house smelled like wood polish, old books, and lavender sachets. Without my father's presence, it breathed differently, like it was finally at peace. I walked through each room slowly. The living room, the dining room, the kitchen. Upstairs, my old bedroom with the posters still taped to the wall. Then the master bedroom, my grandmother's reading chair by the window, a stack of novels on the table. Then the garden. I stood at the back door and looked out at what had been Eleanor Vance's pride. The peony beds now brown and tangled, the stone path barely visible. I knelt, pressed my palms flat against the cold earth, and closed my eyes. "I'll fix it, Grandma," I said. "I'll bring it back." A week later, I drove 90 minutes to the coast. I hadn't been there in years. The cabin was smaller than I remembered, weathered cedar shingles, a porch wrapping around two sides, salt air thick enough to taste. The key turned smoothly, and the door opened onto a space that still smelled like her. Lavender, old paperbacks, cedar. On the kitchen table sat a wooden box. Inside, a stack of photographs of Grandma and me at this very cabin, planting beach grass, building driftwood forts. And under the photographs, a brief letter, "Eliza, this house is yours. It always was. I was just keeping it warm for you. Start over here if you need to. I am so proud of you." Always, Grandma. I sat on the porch and cried. Not the way I'd cried before, stifled and ashamed. This was different. This was the kind that leaves you lighter. I'm telling you this story from the porch of that coastal cabin. The tide is out. I come here on weekends when I need to remember what quiet sounds like. I'm not telling this to teach anyone a lesson. Every family is its own country with its own laws. I can only tell you what I did. Here's what I know now. Silence isn't agreement. I spent years being quiet, and people took that silence and called it consent. It wasn't. It was just a woman who hadn't found her evidence yet. Waiting isn't weakness. My father and brother counted on me not fighting. They were almost right. But there's a difference between someone who can't fight and someone who's choosing when to. My grandmother didn't just leave me money. She left me proof that someone in my family saw me, the real me, and decided I was worth protecting. Not with words, with documents, with plans, with the kind of love that hires a lawyer and thinks years ahead. That's the inheritance that changed my life, the knowledge that I was worth the trouble. Silence isn't agreement, it's just waiting for your evidence. The best inheritance isn't money, it's proof that you were seen. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to Mind Unveiled. Check the description for more stories like this one, and let me know in the comments, when was the last time you felt invisible in your own family? I read every comment.